Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements in a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
When deceit lurks in the ledgers and villains hide behind spreadsheets, one fearless auditor follows the trail of truth wherever it leads. She's the defender of documentation, the guardian of internal control, the fraud fighter with X-ray audit vision. She's Pamela. Yes, no scam Pamela, the fraud-fighting force with a keen eye, sharp instinct, and the courage to trust both. When numbers don't add up, she digs in. Her investigation shows that documentation isn't just paperwork, it's proof. And when internal controls fail or background checks are skipped, Pamela's there to shine the light of accountability where shadows once fell. With wisdom forged from real-world fraud cases, she teaches auditors everywhere to stay vigilant, follow their instincts, and never underestimate the power of professional skepticism. So join us, truth seekers, as we follow the fearless footsteps of the heroine who turns suspicion into certainty and evidence into justice.
Mine is a story of fraud. Unfortunately, hashtag spoiler alert, it was never prosecuted. Really was hoping to share the story because I think it can help auditors think about what it means to keep fraud at the forefront of our mind, even when we're just performing our regular day-to-day duties. I think we talk about that in standards, and our standards, talk about being aware of aspects of fraud, but what does that really mean? And so I'm hoping that my story can kind of cement that for some people.
Well, what kind of entity was it? Do you mind telling us? Was it a county government? Was it a city government?
State level of
State
government. Yes.
Yeah, because you said you were a state auditor. So was it a state agency?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And it is a smaller state agency that has a very seasonal business.
Right.
So at one time of the year, this organization significantly expands its staff, So it has a lot of temporary staff and those kinds of things. My story takes place right after that event. So within a couple of months following that event. So we were back down to a smaller staff size. I would say under 20 full-time regular annual employees. So very, very small. It's just that because of this one significant event, it expands at a certain portion of the year.
Okay. Lots of cash involved or something? Is there a lot of transactions also at that point? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And that's what this kind of, how this kind of came about. So I was their contracted internal auditor, so I only worked part-time. So I didn't have the advantage of being on site all the time, knowing what was going on. But I think that that's another thing that auditors can be thinking about. And oftentimes, many governments are still partially, if not fully remote. So how are we making sure that we're staying up to date with what's really going on with the organization when we're not there all the time? And I think it's possible. It's just something to think about.
Okay.
One of the advantages of being internal to the organization is you're there and you know what's happening and you're kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the organization. So we just need to remember that even when we have remote workforces. So I was hired to perform a risk assessment. So again, I came in after this seasonal event to do this risk assessment. So I just came in one afternoon. I came on site to do a risk assessment meeting with the head of the organization. And when we sat down to have this meeting, I could tell he was really stressed. And he just, he kind of looked at me and he said, "Oh, I've had a day," he said. And he starts to describe the scenario of one of the other employees arrived in the morning and found the safe was wide open and empty. And so, of course, that employee was, I know, right? Not a great start to the day. And I'm all, of all people, you're telling your auditor this, right?
Yes,
So
yeah.
the the
Uh,
hairs on the back of my neck are going up. I'm like, yeah, that's not good.
uh,
So that employee was stressed out about getting in trouble, and so he goes on to explain that he has an employee who's been out sick.
oh,
So what I love about this is one of those red flags we hear all about. So of the employee that is perpetrating a fraud that can't take vacation, right? And in this case, can't take sick leave. So supposedly, allegedly came in early in the morning under the darkness cover of night and came in and opened the safe and took out the deposit and left. But for whatever reason, forgot to close the safe. And had this employee remembered to close the safe, none of this would have even been discovered, or at least at this point, it
oh,
wouldn't have been
no.
discovered.
Okay, all right.
So, and then he kind of goes on to say, "Well, I'm not too worried about it. I think everything's going to resolve itself, and let's get into the conversation." And I stopped him right there, and I said, I said, "Actually, let's talk about this a little bit." So, I right.
Uh, pretend like
So
you didn't see
I had
that. I didn't say that.
Right,
Ah, it's a
right.
mess. Ah,
So I had a chance to share with him and just information I hadn't had a chance to share with them yet. Part of the duties that I'd been asked to do, I just was doing some general regular controls reviews, and this is an organization that does have a petty cash. And to know me personally is to know petty cash is one of my boogaboos. I just wonder, why do organizations still need to have petty cash?
yeah.
But truly, this is an organization that, because of their business model, makes a lot of sense for them to have a petty cash. But I didn't want to do a surprise petty cash count during that big event. So I had purposely waited until after the event. Well, surprisingly enough, I just couldn't get this employee. I don't like to tell people I'm doing a petty cash count. Those are one of those things we like to surprise people with. But every time I'd go to try to do it, she'd be busy or have to be running out. And
Oh, huh?
so, one day I just showed up at her office and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I'd like to do I didn't say surprise count. I said I'd like to do a petty cash count."
Yeah.
And this had happened maybe 2 weeks prior to this event. And so she immediately made this excuse and she said, "Oh, I have to run this errand really quick." And she leaves the office, and you don't have any control over that. All you can do is document it and say, "Okay, this happened." And I wouldn't have thought to tell him about this, except for now we're facing a situation where this employee has come in when no staff were
Mm,
around, taken things out of the safe, left the safe open. So she did come back to the office that same day and handed me the petty cash bag. And when I opened it, it was several neatly folded $20 bills. Well, I have counted enough petty cash funds to know we don't typically just have, there are typically several denominations.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
sort of the point of petty cash.
yeah. Some checks, some,
um,
like, coins maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. I was like,
Hmm,
this is odd.
hmm.
So I documented and thought about all of this, but I just hadn't shared it with the head of the organization. So I shared with him the story, and then I said, "Give me an hour. Let me go to her up because she's on sick leave at this point, and we know that this situation has happened. We know that she has the deposit somewhere offsite." So I said, "Give me an hour in her office." So the first thing I started with was deposit slips, because we know we're looking at a situation where supposedly she's coming in to do the deposit. So, and this is where the story dates itself and why I gave the caveat of it's about 8 or 9 years ago. So we had, the old school big deposit books with the duplicate entries, right?
Yeah,
So you'd
yeah.
have an original
Carbon
and then a
copy.
duplicate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And so at first glance, I start to notice there are huge chunks of deposit slips missing. They're just gone. They're just not in the deposit book. And I'm like, well, that's odd. Why again, why would one take deposit slips out of the deposit book?
Yeah, yeah.
And and so then I start
Uh,
looking at the carbon copies that are in there.
yeah.
And so this is, whether you want to look at this as good or bad, But my advice to fraudsters, if you are going to mess with a deposit, take the whole deposit book with you, because leaving enough for me to be able to put this back in order was not great for this person. So I started looking at these deposit slips, and what I started noticing was I would see 2 deposit slips in order, but the checks, so I'd have deposit slip 1 and deposit slip 2. One of them had cash on it, the second one did not. But the second one was the exact same checks that were on the first one, but written in a different order. So she would write the true deposit slip. Here was how much, received. But then what we suspect is she would take the cash and then actually deposit the checks only from the second deposit slip. So only one was actually going to the bank, but she wrote up 2 full
I
deposit
see.
slips. I guess assuming, and this is where, again, from a controls perspective, we know why we like 2 people involved in these cash transactions, why
Yeah.
2 people should be involved in deposits, why 2 people should be involved in
Mhm.
all of these types of things, right?
Yep. Yep.
Unfortunately, again, the thing that I learned about fraud investigations and fraud potential prosecutions is that cash is very, very difficult to prosecute. So just having this alone wasn't enough, even though I could show the trail of, we clearly have several of these where the cash just wasn't getting deposited. But you can't, it's really hard to go back and prove that. So great. I have some good evidence, but I don't have enough. So continued on through the office looking for other things. And the other thing that we know about fraud is once an employee has gotten away with something, they will generally, usually, if it's truly a fraud situation, they'll move on to something else. They'll try other things.
Okay.
So whether you want to go with the ethics of this or not, the employee was on sick leave. I was in the employee's office. I was not at a home. I was not in a car. I was on state property. So I began to go through other things in this person's desk and found a
Oh.
portfolio that had some letters. And the letters were around an unemployment claim made prior to this person's employment here at where they were currently employed.
Mhm.
But it definitely alluded to something weird had gone on with an unemployment claim too. Again, didn't use this for, this doesn't impact this organization, but I could use it to be able to show there were some other things going on. It wasn't just about what was happening in this situation. Um, w- Later on in the investigation, when we did get our state police involved, and when we got a district attorney involved, they said, "Hey, if you could get this other agency to come in and also press charges, you'd have a much stronger case."
Oh,
Unfortunately, they decided the dollar amount was, and I think it was around
minimus.
$13,000 that was
Mm,
in question. They decided it wasn't enough to move forward either.
mm,
So that was another reason behind the
mm,
non-prosecution. Kind of a
mm.
bummer, but it
Yeah.
is what it is. So I knew I needed something else that was going on with this organization other than just the cash piece that I was able to kind of put my arms around.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
So let me make sure I'm clear. The 13,000 was the unemployment claim, or the 13,000 was the cash?
No, that was the unemployment claim. So that's a great question. I would say probably less than 10,000. It was a decent amount of money. Yeah, but
All right.
it was a decent amount, but it wasn't life-changing, probably dollars. Yeah.
If she's doing it every day, it can change your life. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. But another reason, don't accept cash.
Yeah.
Cash businesses it's a tough business to be in. So because of this large seasonal event, this organization had a large inventory of gift cards that were used during this seasonal
Oh
event.
my gosh.
At the end of the event, these gift cards had really nominal values on them, but they still had a value to them, right? So let's say it was a 25 or a $50 gift card. It had, at the end of the event, it had $2 or $3 and some change left on them, most of them. So, I had noticed that, these gift cards still existed and still were on site. And so I was asking somebody about, "Hey, how do we process these?" And this name came up. Oh, this person was dealing with it. And I thought, "Oh, great. Okay." So I contacted the bank, and the bank, and this is where, if you think auditors get excited about fraud, people who work in banks get really excited about fraud.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Um, but this bank employee did a heroic amount of investigating to help me out on this one, because they, on the bank side, could see where the money had been deposited to these remainders of these gift cards. And so we would see every second or third transaction was going to this outside company. So you'd see this organization get a yes.
This gets
So
better and
yeah.
better.
Yes,
Okay.
it does. And
Okay.
so how we were able to track this one was through social media. This person had connected with several of us, including myself, on Facebook and LinkedIn. And the name of this person's business was on Facebook and LinkedIn, and which was, shockingly enough, the account that these gift cards were going to. Uh, so So I was able to get the evidence to be able to support the claim, but the dollar amount, even though now we're talking about gift card transactions, which have different rules than cash does, but we were still talking about such a very low dollar amount
Yeah.
that it was just difficult to get any traction on it. But it really was interesting, the amount of length that this person went to and the amount of time it must have taken to deposit all of these individual $2 and $3 transactions. You know,
It's
I
money.
I had to give it creativity, yes.
Yeah.
And something that nobody else was gonna go looking for. I wouldn't have gone looking for it had it not been for this situation. I just was looking for, what transactions was this person involved in? And again, this was a process, it wasn't documented. There were not 2 people involved in this process. So all of these things that we know as auditors should have been happening that nobody was questioning weren't happening. So again, just a reminder to auditors that are out there, you might get frustrated in the mundane day-to-day internal control reviews, but this is why we do them,
Do
because these
yeah.
control weaknesses do exist and nobody's asking these questions until something goes wrong. So anyway, so once I had that evidence, it was primarily those 3 things. We did go ahead and, actually, we sat down with her. She still was too sick to come into the office, so we did unfortunately do this conversation over the phone, which, if you know about fraud investigations and that kind of thing. And another important thing I want to note here, I did not do this conversation alone. It was myself, the head of the organization, and this organization also contracted for its human resource services. So we had a human resource professional there as well. So the 3 of us did this, and unfortunately we did it over the phone. I would definitely recommend if you can do this in person, because there's a lot of body language things you could have been looking for, that kind of thing. Um, uh, so, um, so we started out with the day that the safe was found. And so we asked, well, because the deposit, a couple days later still hasn't hit the bank, right? This deposit she supposedly came in and got out of the safe, it still hasn't been deposited. And so we
'Cause
called, and
she's
that's
sick.
what we started. Yes, because she's sick. Yes.
She's sick.
It gets
Mhm.
better, Lita. So where
What?
is the deposit? It's in my husband's vehicle, which is parked at the post office. That's where my husband works, is at the post office. So why, oh why do you believe it's okay to have somebody who's not an employee of this organization has custody of the deposit and locked in a car for 8 hours a day for now we're looking at 2 or 3 days. Why is this happening? It was kind of amazing, I have to say. So we went through a lot of conversation with her, and then towards the end of the conversation, she did say the words. She said, "This is feeling more like an interrogation. Do I need to get a lawyer involved?" So, I let HR take it from there, and I went back to just the evidence. But it was enough at least to be able to place her on administrative leave so the investigation could be conducted. They did obviously eventually terminate her employment. We completed the investigation. We did get state police involved. We got a district attorney
Wow.
assigned to the case. I don't believe the case was ever prosecuted.
Mhm.
But we did have a lot of lesson learned. I had a lot of lessons learned as a professional. I learned a lot about the differences between fraud investigating and auditing. I'd done a couple minor things, but this was definitely the biggest thing I'd ever been involved in. And I will say it is a lot of documentation. I was overwhelmed with the amount of documentation involved. And but overall it was a learning experience. It was disappointing. I do have a couple, funny little things that came to light during the investigation. I had an employee come to me and say, "Well, I'd talked to this person, and she had told me how much knowledge she had about auditing." Now, this person knows that I work for the organization and am an auditor, right? She had told me how much knowledge she had about auditing and how she had the ability to cover up anything so that an auditor would never be able to tell. Why as an employee would you brag about being able to hide things from an auditor if you're I it's again, it's little red flags like that if somebody would have come forward when she first made that statement so that we could have asked, "Why are you making these statements? Why
It's almost
why are
as
you
if shining a spotlight on herself because she's made a lot of mistakes. She didn't close the safe. She kept records.
Yes,
She
yes.
kept personal information in her drawer, an open drawer at work.
In her office.
She posted the name of her fraudulent company on social media, and now she's telling the auditor that she's smarter than the auditor.
Yes, 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 all of these things.
So she's that's insane.
Yes,
What
yes.
is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5
Red flag.
stupid things for a fraudster to do.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
maybe this episode is about teaching fraudsters how to do a better job.
Right.
Like, don't do
Let's
all
no,
these
let's not
things.
couch it like that, Lita.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay.
Another thing for auditors to be aware of and cognizant of, should they find themselves in a situation similar to this, or even just in our regular risk assessment processes and what we're looking at in our organizations. Another thing that I went back to question, how did this happen? When I'm trying to do root
Mhm.
cause analysis, how did we get here?
Right.
Is the background check process. So
Yeah.
I come to find out this employee had worked for another state, actually 3 other, but only one that I know that had gone wrong, another state agency. And although in that position, she didn't have access to cash like she did for this organization, that organization did terminate her employment. So something went wrong in that
Mhm.
background check process. Because when
Yeah.
I called the head of that organization, who happened to be a connection that I had, she literally said, "Pam, I have been waiting for you to call me," because she knew this employee had taken a job there. So it does really make me sad. That would be more than the trying to get the money back or anything like that. It would have been nice to see this case get prosecuted because I worry when governments continue to hire a person into different positions that have gotten away with things at other organizations, and that's really, really scary. We have to make sure our background processes are solid,
Yeah.
and we should be openly sharing this information with each other and not. I think we get into this risk averse scenario of, I don't want my issue publicized, so I'm not going to share. I'm not going to come forward and be forward with it. And I know that there are human resource laws around hiring and all of those kinds of things, but
Right. Right.
when we know that people could potentially harm us and harm what is the public's, because that's what we're here to safeguard, is what is the public's. It's really, really scary and sad that we can't shore up those processes and really make sure we have good communication and good background check processes.
You think the real reason they didn't prosecute is because it's so minor of an amount, or what do you think? The hassle factor? What do you think?
Well, so I'll tell you, Lita, I do think that the dollar amount had something to do with it. Unfortunately, I also think that it is very possible that the head of this organization, he and I had several conversations, because I'm a strong believer in, we talk about fraud can be a preventative, doing a fraud investigation can be a preventative control when your staff and the public know, hey, we were willing to prosecute on this issue. But unfortunately, we also know that organizations, and this is not just the government, but all organizations, there is a tendency to want to sweep it under the rug because we don't want it publicized.
Embarrassing.
And as I've mentioned, this is an organization that has a big seasonal event that does draw the public, that is publicized, that is marketed. And so that poor reputation, that reputational risk, I think may have come into play here. I don't know for sure, but I do know there was some anxiety. I think when we first found out about it, yes, there was we want to stop this. We want to not allow this to happen again. But then as time went on, and investigations do take time, that's something to warn all auditors. It's not something you're not gonna get through a fraud investigation in a couple weeks. It's not going to happen. I think as time went on, I think the head of the organization started to get scared about how it was going to impact the future and that bad press and all of and it's kind of easy to sweep it under the rug. So I think that played into it too, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've noticed that with churches, that churches won't publicize because their congregational stop tithing, and they'll let go of the top levels of leadership for not doing a good job with their money. So,
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, you mentioned earlier, you said there's a big difference between auditing and investigations. And there was a lot of documentation involved. Could you describe that to the listeners? Yeah.
Absolutely. This is something I like to talk about a lot because I think we correlate fraud investigating with auditing, and especially in the public sector where our organizations might not have other resources. They probably don't have a fraud team sitting around. And even, I mentioned I was a contractor. I didn't take fraud engagements very often because when a fraud comes along, you have to drop everything and immediately pay attention to it because, we can't, it's already been going on for a while. Well, when you go in to do a fraud investigation, so when I first entered that office, it's in an audit, we might go in and I might say, okay, there were 100 deposits over the last 100 days. So I'm going to randomly sample and sample 10 of those. You can't do that in a fraud investigation. You have to look at all of them.
Yeah.
Because you don't know which one could have potentially had a fraud.
Tedious.
So even though I made it sound really easy in my scenario, I found 2 deposit slips. I can't tell you now how many days it took me to find those 2, and I found several instances, but so you have to look at everything. So I looked at, I can't remember now the time frame, but actually it was pretty simple because she hadn't been there that long. So
Okay.
but I also did a comparative sample with before she got there so that I could show, look, this wasn't standard practice. So that's what I meant by that is when you're doing a fraud investigation, you have to look at all the transactions, not just a sample. And then when state police got involved, and one thing that they did, and I don't know if they do this on all fraud investigations, was they went to another audit firm and had them look at my work papers. So, and that was, I thought that was really good, to make sure that, yes, they could follow the evidence. Yes, this was a supportable. So before they went to the district attorney, another auditor came in, looked at my work and said, yes, this is good and solid, and we can move forward with this. So, that was an interesting thing that had never happened on an audit for me before.
So it wasn't the district attorney that turned down the case. It was the client themselves that said, we don't want to prosecute.
I don't know for sure, but that's what I suspect.
All right.
And it could have been a combination of those 2 things. They could have said together, it wasn't enough money. And yeah, there was resistance on the part of the upper management, at which point I was no longer involved. Yeah. I just wanted to share the good news ultimately was, as I shared already, the employee was terminated. And we did, I always, the few times I have been involved in fraud investigations, I always also followed up with a solid audit report on the control improvements to help
Mm,
prevent this from
sure,
happening in the future.
sure.
And I think that became especially prevalent in a small organization where segregation of duties can be so tough. Just to really, really emphasize to them that, look, this is why we have two people observe cash transactions. This is why we have some of these controls. So we're all ultimately able to make some good positive improvements as a result, even though we weren't able to prosecute.
Did you keep working for them? Did you continue to contract as their internal auditor?
I did, yes, but
Yeah.
then I ultimately accepted a full-time job with another
Oh.
organization, so I did ultimately leave, yes, but
Mhm.
not because of this situation. I
Yeah.
did continue to contract with them, yes.
Are you still connected with her on LinkedIn?
I should go check. I know I'm not connected with her on Facebook anymore. She did, she deleted and blocked several of us that worked for the organization
Right.
at the time as soon as she was terminated, yes.
Holy cow.
That's a great question.
So is there anything you would have done differently next time you get a situation like that? Anything you learned?
Um, you know, I think that's a great question. I actually was quite proud of how quickly I think it's easy sometimes for auditors to allow management to help them explain away a scenario. It would have been really easy for me to sit there and have him tell me this story and then have him say, "But we're not going to worry about it," and just say, "Oh, okay," and go about my business. So
Mhm.
I actually was very, very proud of how I handled it. I maybe I would have maybe I would have had a little bit more courage and contracted the district attorney myself. I
Right.
think I kind of allowed, once it was handed over to state police, I kind of backed out and maybe I should have pressed the issue a little bit further.
Right.
I definitely would have followed my gut a little bit earlier because I did know that she had worked for other state agencies, and I probably should have called all of them when I first started to feel like there was something off with this employee. So that would have been the other thing. Just following your gut when you're just even having conversations with somebody and you're like, this just feels off.
Mhm.
I should have followed my gut a little bit because I didn't go into all the details, but there were other things that she had said and done during the course of the months that I worked with her that I was just like, there just something isn't right about this relationship. I mean, we're auditors, right? So I'm used to people not always loving what I do, but
Yeah.
there was really a resistance to what I was doing versus we should be partners in this.
Very good. You were a great guest.
Well, thank you again so much for having me.
You're a superhero.
So again, I don't know, but I hope that at least an auditor listening hears and says, I am validated, and maybe an auditor chooses to follow their gut on something that they otherwise might not have
Exactly.
thought it was worth following.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!